Is it recording? I think it is. All right, I think we're recording to the cloud. Welcome to Anatomy and Physiology. This is our first lecture, and this is actually the first pre-recorded lecture I've done on Zoom for an online class. And so you're gonna have to bear with me a little bit. There's gonna be some weirdness, and we'll just have to sort of roll with it. We're gonna start today with chapter 1, which is, it's just kind of the introductory chapter to Anatomy and Physiology. So I will share my screen right away. Let's see here. I want to make sure this will work. And you should be seeing chapter 1, lecture outline. We're going to go from current slide. We're going to go ahead and present. And here we go. So chapter 1, Anatomy and Physiology. What is anatomy and physiology? Well, I think most of us know what anatomy is. It's pretty easy. It's the study of the form and structure of the body. Physiology is a little bit different. So anatomy is just, here's the part. Here's the part. Here's what it looks like. Here's what the name of the part is. That's anatomy. It's just the parts. It's, if we were to take apart a motor, you've got pistons, you've got camshafts, you've got, I don't know, I'm not a motor guy. I'm an anatomy guy. That's the anatomy of the motor, just the names of the parts. The physiology is going to be, the physiology of the human body is going to be, how do the functions occur? What are the functions? How do they work? And how do they then relate to the structure of the part? So in a motor, in a gasoline engine, you're going to have these pistons and spark plugs and parts, but the physiology of that engine is going to be, what does it do and how does that action relate to the part itself, and then why the part looks the way that it does. Form and function, right? Form and function are interrelated. The reason that a body part looks the way that it does is because it has to do this particular job. And in some cases, the reason that the body part does this particular job is because of the way that it looks. So that's really important to understand, is that these forms and functions are interrelated. And so to have a conversation about anatomy, you really should be having a conversation about physiology as well, and vice versa. In order to have that conversation about physiology, you should be having a conversation about anatomy as well. Now, so that's anatomy and physiology. There's a definition for you right there. But because this is biology, because this is a scientific class, you don't get out of science class without a little short explanation on the scientific method. Scientific method is important. And it's important for you guys to understand and know. We use the scientific method every single day. It's this process. Essentially, it's a process of elimination. Within our thing here, our PowerPoint here, we've got this nice little quotation. It refers to a systematic and rigorous process by which scientists do all of these things: examine natural events, develop hypotheses, experiment and test, and then determine whether or not those experiments, the data generated by those experiments and tests, support the conclusion or hypothesis that you've come up with. So that's the scientific method. We're buzzing through things pretty fast here. We're just going, we're moving. Microscopic anatomy. We will spend a fair bit of time studying the microscopic anatomy of the human body. Of course, we know that microscopic anatomy refers to things that cannot be seen by the naked eye or the unaided eye. We can look at them through a microscope. The microscope allows us to see things at a very small, we see really small things. But when we determine whether the determining factor between whether something is macro or microscopic is whether or not you can see it with your naked eye. Now, when we look at specimens under the microscopes, we're going to be dividing things into two divisions. We're going to either be studying the cells themselves and their internal structure, or we're going to be studying the group of cells and what their function is together. All right. Now, later on, we're going to talk a little bit about the hierarchy of the human body, which starts at the cell. We go from cells to tissues to organs to organ systems to organism. And that's important to understand because certain cells are going to look a certain way. The cytology of a cell is going to be specific to what that cell is doing, but the histology of that cell may be a little bit different because that cell is going to be working with a whole bunch of other cells to accomplish some purpose in the human body. So then we get to gross anatomy, and you guys will hear this term being thrown around quite a bit, gross anatomy. This is macroscopic anatomy. This is, we're looking at structures that you can see just with your regular naked eye. And we divide these. We've got several divisions, as you can see here: systemic, regional, surface, comparative, embryology. These are all really important because it allows for us to look at different structures and then classify them based on what they're doing. Systemic anatomy, we're going to be looking at the anatomy of each body system. Regional anatomy is going to be looking at the structures in a region of the body. And then comparative anatomy is going to be looking at anatomical similarities and differences in similar species. Well, different species, similar species, and all of the different species, you know, on Earth. I'm not keeping up with my slideshow very well here. Anyway, and then embryology. Embryology is really a kind of interesting and a little bit, it's not really apart from regular anatomy. Embryology is important, and it's definitely a very integral part of the study. But embryology sort of has a place all of its own because the structures of the developing fetus, not all of the structures have developed until that fetus has developed all the way. And so embryology is looking at these different tissues and the development of those tissues, the development of the structures, so on and so forth. Then we get to the physiology, the details of the function, right? We've got some subdisciplines here of physiology: cardiovascular physiology, neurophysiology, respiratory, reproductive, and pathophysiology. Many of you guys will be taking a class specific to pathophysiology, focuses on the function of a body system during disease or injury to that system. That's going to be pretty important stuff for a lot of you because you're headed into the medical field. Now, we will be kind of focusing on these other subdisciplines. I don't spend a whole lot of time on pathophysiology because we have a whole class dedicated to it. It would be redundant. And so we're gonna kind of move through these through the course of 2 semesters. This is the first semester, of course, A&P 1. You'll take A&P 2 later on. So, form and function, anatomy and physiology, interrelated. And integrating these 2 disciplines, of course, is going to be the easiest way to learn about both. Like I said, gotta have a conversation about both. And this slide, really, I'm just talking about the same stuff that I did earlier. So I'm going to move along. So here are some ideas. Now this slide was in the textbook PowerPoint slides. And I thought about just getting rid of it because you guys should know how to study by this time. And I'm sure that most of you do. And then I thought, no, let's leave it in because this will be good. This is good stuff to be reminded of, or this is good stuff to think about if you haven't already thought about it. Best practices for studying anatomy and physiology. Now, you guys know, because I told you, I sent you an email and I told you, this is the hardest class that we offer at Eastern Arizona College, aside from the nursing stuff. You guys will have stories. You're going to be telling stories. You're going to get into your fields, into your careers, and you're going to be telling war stories about anatomy and physiology. It is a tough class. and it's made tougher because we're online. So best practices here. Schedule regular daily study sessions well before the exam. And when I say study sessions, okay, here's the thing. So many students feel like they can just look at the PowerPoint, get the basics, and move forward. You can't do that in this class. You cannot. You have to read your book. So please schedule time to read your book. It's going to be important. Your book is going to be really the main resource that you have for understanding this stuff. I mean, you know, you have me, but you kind of don't have me too. I mean, if you want me, give me a call, but you sort of are in a tough spot because I'm not going to be available to you 3 times a week in lecture. You guys are really responsible for the bulk of your own learning. And so you have to utilize the main resource that we give you, well, that we make you buy. But you've got to utilize that, which is your textbook and the accompanying resources that you get from Connect. So schedule that, use it, and do it before the exam, well before the exam. Multiple short study sessions. Don't go in thinking, okay, I'm going to do a marathon study. I've done this before and it doesn't work. I'm going to go in, I'm just going to spend the next 4 hours studying anatomy and physiology. 30 minutes in and you're already like, you know, bored, you're looking on YouTube, you know, you're cruising Facebook, Instagram, you know, what have you, Snapchat. I don't do Snapchat myself because I'm old. But anyway, 30 minutes in and you're already bored of this because it's heavy stuff. It's boring stuff. Anatomy and physiology is you're going to run across things that are boring. So break it up. Don't study for 4 hours at a time. Break it up. You're gonna have to break it up. Minimize your distractions, of course. I know many of you have families. I know many of you you're either living at home with family or you have made a family. And so that's not gonna be an easy thing to do. Minimizing distractions is very hard. It's one of the challenges of online learning. But wherever you can, you're going to need to try to minimize as many distractions as possible. Study in the evening when the kids are in bed. Perhaps study during the afternoon when your kids are on their own high school classes, elementary school classes. Of course, I say that, and a lot of your students are going to need your help. If you can find some time to study without distractions, that's going to be kind of important. But in this day and age, and particularly this year with our pandemic, I know how hard that's going to be. So do the best you can. And then utilize active learning methods. Active learning methods. You know, we're always talking about active learning. It's a buzzword in education. Active learning means that you are involving yourself in the material somehow. Whether that's looking at videos, whether that's writing down notes, whether that's going through all of the different little case studies, whether that's going to the back of the book and doing the questions in the back of the book. You are involving yourself somehow in the material that you're studying. When you're studying muscles, you know, pinch your arms, look for the different muscles, flex your arms and see if you can find those muscle groups. When you're messing around with your eyes, when you're studying the eyes, have a mirror in front of you so that you can look at all of the different parts of your own eye. Anything that you can do to just go a little bit beyond just merely reading, that's going to be important, and it's going to help you develop the neural pathways that will give you the opportunity for memory recall. Quiz yourself, explain concepts. That last one right there, explain concepts to a partner. I am here to tell you that I have learned more as a teacher in anatomy and physiology than I ever did as a student. And it's because I have now people that are relying on me to teach it to them. And so I've got to break it down in terms that they can understand and use. If you have a willing partner, teach them this stuff. It's going to be the best way to learn it, is to teach it. If excuse me, if you can get to a study session, a study group, it's gotta be the best way to do it. You teach this part, your study partner teaches this part. I know some of you are in Thatcher, Safford, Pima area, the Gila Valley. I know some of you are in Globe. I know some of you are up here in Payson. I know some of you are scattered throughout Arizona. You're in the Valley, you know, you might be in Flagstaff, you might be all over, and some of you are even outside of the state. But if there are people in our class that you live near, please put together some sort of a study group. It's going to help. It's going to help a lot because you're going to have somebody that you can teach to and somebody that can teach to you as well. Study with a partner or group. Boom, right there. And then utilize the textbook resources. All of this stuff is going to be pretty important. The assessments in the chapter, the Learn Smart on Connect, Anatomy and Physiology Revealed. We're going to use some of this stuff in class, but you're going to want to explore these resources as much as you can. So, characteristics that describe all living things. These are properties common to everything that is alive. So we're talking from the tiniest bacteria to the largest animal. Coincidentally, the blue whale, many of you know this already, but the blue whale is the largest organism that has ever lived on planet Earth. So I don't know, that's kind of cool. When you think about it, it's really sort of an honor to share the planet with the largest organism on planet Earth that has ever been. Bigger than the dinosaurs. I mean, you know, I've seen some pretty big dinosaur bones in museums around, and they got big, but they're not as big as a blue whale. So anyway, so this is common to everything from the blue whale all the way down to your bacteria. Organization. All organisms are going to exhibit some sort of complexity. Metabolism. All organisms are going to be building up molecules and breaking them down. Growth and development. Organisms will assimilate materials from the environment. You know, you and I are going to go out and get a hamburger or a slice of pizza and assimilate that into our organismal body. Other animals are going to be assimilating other things, minerals, micronutrients, macronutrients, sunlight. Anyway, and these things then are going to help us to grow and develop. Responsiveness, the ability to sense and react to stimuli. If somebody slaps you across the face, then you are going to react in some way to that stimulus. Regulation, this is going to be the ability to adjust bodily functions to maintain a balance, an internal balance in the body. And that's really what homeostasis is. Homeostasis is going to be the ability of your body to maintain a balance. Homeostasis. Remember that. That's a term that you guys need to understand and know. I think it's on the final. And I know it's going to be on the next test. So understand that term. And then, of course, reproduction. Living things can reproduce. We produce new cells for growth, and some of us organisms are producing sex cells, gametes, sperm and egg, oocytes, spermicides, that sort of thing. And these sex cells, we can create these new organisms. So then we go, this is the hierarchy that I was just telling you about. Simplest to most complex, the chemical level, cellular, tissue, organ system, and organismal level. Of course, your chemical level is going to be atoms and molecules. At the chemical level, we do not see the presence of life, right? There's not a living molecule. Molecules they have to be organized into cells before a living condition can occur. And that's really where it comes next to, is the cell is the basic unit of life. Tissues are going to be cells, similar cells that perform a common function. Organs are going to be tissues working together to perform a common function. Organ systems are related organs working together to perform a common function. And then the organismal level, all of the organ systems are working together to accomplish the common function, which is to maintain the living condition. So here it is. You know, we got atoms and molecules right here, to macromolecules right here. We'll study these a little bit, to organelles, to cells. So right here, this is the threshold of life, right? You can have organelles, they're not alive. You can have macromolecules, they're not alive. They're not alive until you get to cells. Then we get to tissues, organs, organ systems, and here's the organism, this little guy with his cup of joe, standing there smiling at us. All of his bodily functions, presumably working together to maintain the living condition, except not really, because he's just a picture in your textbook. He's a collection of molecules, pigment molecules, so he's not alive. You are alive. Anyway, let's move on here. You've got 11 organ systems that we will be studying over the course of 2 semesters. Integumentary, skeletal, muscular, nervous, endocrine, cardiovascular, lymphatic, respiratory, urinary, digestive, and reproductive systems. And here they are, you know, in some picture glory here, organ systems. I will let you guys study this book picture on your own time. We don't need to, you know, we've got surface, skeletal. Let's just move on. I do this in my face-to-face classes all the time. Throw up a slide. I'm like, you know, I think, oh, this is a good picture for me to show. And then I get there, I'm like, this is, no, I don't need to. You can look at this on your own time. So that brings us now to anatomic position. So anatomic position is a common reference position. If we were in class, I would stand up and show you. It's an upright stance, feet parallel and flat on the floor, upper limbs. Here, let's see here. Let's see here. All right, upper limbs aside from the body. Palms anteriorly toward the front, head is level, eyes look forward. I don't know. There's a picture coming up. When you see the picture, you'll know. I want you guys all to do an anatomic position at some point before you go to bed tonight. I want you to stand up and I want you to list these things. Upright stance, feet parallel, flat on the floor, upper limbs at the sides of the bodies, palms face anteriorly, head is level, eyes look forward. Where's my picture of, okay, let me back up here. So each one of these pictures is anatomical position, except for this idiot who's looking off to the side. Come on, dude, come on. Of course, that's to, you know, display this upper respiratory system. But this is an anatomical position right here. Eyes are faced forward, head is level, palms are faced anteriorly, feet are apart, parallel and flat on the floor. So then we get to sections and planes. And we're gonna go over a little bit more of that anatomical language in just a minute. But then we've got these sections. So when you slice the body, we're going to call that a section or a plane because we're essentially taking this two-dimensional sort of snapshot of the body. So a section, well, a section is going to be an actual slice that exposes the internal anatomy, but a plane is going to be an imaginary flat surface that passes through the body. Like you know, if I were to take a piece of paper and just slide it in between, you know, this half of my head and this half of my head. And we've got several different types of planes. We've got a coronal or frontal plane. In most literature that I've read, frontal is the word that we use. We don't use coronal quite as often, but you're going to hear both of them referenced. That's going to be a vertical plane, so it's going up and down, dividing the body into front and back parts. Anterior is the front, posterior is the back. So that slice is going to go all the way down the middle, slicing and sectioning the body into front and back parts. Then you get a transverse. That's going to be a horizontal plane. So that's going to be across this way, dividing the body into superior and inferior, top and bottom. Now these are important terms to understand. You guys are going to need to know, what does anterior and posterior mean? What does superior and inferior mean? I want you to study those. I want you to understand them. They show up on tests. and they show up in labs. And you have to understand them in order to really understand the language of the book as well. But that's a transverse or cross-sectional. We're going to take that blade, that section, that plane, and we're going to just slice right across. Boom, boom, right there, transverse. Then we get to mid-sagittal or median plane. That's going to be another vertical plane, so going up and down, dividing the body into left and right halves. I don't know. Let's see. I got the L. Left. So my left is your right, I guess. Doesn't matter. Left and right halves. Sliced right down the middle, right? Sagittal plane. Any sagittal plane is going to be parallel to mid-sagittal, but you can have a sagittal plane over here, over here, over here. But once it gets to the middle of your body, that's when it's a mid-sagittal plane. And then we have an oblique plane, which is going to be just going through at an angle. The terms that you guys are going to be looking at mostly are going to be frontal, transverse, and sagittal or mid-sagittal in some cases. You're not going to see a whole lot of oblique planes, but every once in a while we use that. So, and here's our picture, right? So here we've got our mid-sagittal right there. I hope you guys can see my mouse, my cursor. There's our mid-sagittal. Here's our frontal or coronal right there. And then here's our transverse right here. Essentially, we're dividing the body into X, Y, and Z planes, right? So any of you guys that have been taking some mathematics, you should know, there it is. There's the 3 dimensions of the body, X, Y, and Z. So let's see here, sections from a 3-dimensional structure. We see this a little bit. So here we've got an oblique plane right there out of the small intestine, which gives us a shape that looks like that. Here's just a regular old no, that's not transverse. That's going to be sagittal right there. Sagittal plane right there gives you a ring. But if we take that sagittal plane right here, we get a little bit of a different look right there, don't we? Or if we take it right there, another little bit different sort of look. So depending on where you're taking these planes, you're going to have a lot of different looks to the body. And you're going to notice that as we look at the pictures of the body later on. You're going to see, you know, we take a transverse plane right here at the gut, and you're going to see all of these different little weird holes, and you're going to think, where are all those holes coming from? Well, it's where the small intestine and large intestine are going through several times that plane. It'll make sense when you see it. Let's see, yeah, anatomic position, the directional terminology here, anterior, posterior, dorsal, ventral, proximal, distal. So let's look at this. Anterior is the front side, posterior is the back side, superior is the upper, right? So your head is superior to the rest of your body. Inferior is going to be the bottom, so your feet are inferior to the rest of your body. Medial is going to be more toward the middle, and then lateral is more toward the edges, okay? Proximal is going to be closer to the mid line of the body. Distal is going to be further away. And so let's see here. I've got my fingers, right? My fingers are distal, okay? They are distal to my elbow. All right. My shoulder, however, is proximal to my elbow. My fingers are farther away from the midline than the elbow, but the shoulder is closer to the midline than the elbow. So the shoulder is proximal to the elbow. The fingers are distal to the elbow. Okay. But this is where things kind of get a little bit weird, right? My shoulder may be proximal to my elbow, but my shoulder is distal to my collarbone, right? I hope this is making sense because now my shoulder compared to my collarbone is now farther away from the midsection of the body than my collarbone. And so the shoulder is distal to the collarbone, even though the shoulder is proximal to the elbow, right? Okay, let's move along. Ask me questions through the emails if you need to. Regional anatomy, this gets pretty complicated. I don't need you guys to know every single little regional term. There should be a study guide. There should be kind of a list of terms that you should know. You're going to see a picture coming up here that's going to be really overwhelming. You should know these regions. You should know these regions, and you're probably going to have to know them if you're heading into the medical field. But for my class, you can just kind of focus on what I've got in my terms. Anyway, axial region is going to be the head, neck, and trunk, right? Head, neck, and then the trunk. Appendicular region is going to be your upper and lower limbs. So your appendages, right? Your appendages are going to be the floppy things that stick out from your trunk. The trunk is going to be the axial. So, and then we've got, I mean, within each one of those regions are several more, right? Cervical, cephalic, thoracic, abdominal, pelvic. And then within those, within the cephalic, I'm going to have the frontal region, the orbital region, the buccal, the nasal, the oral, the mental. All of those terms you guys will probably use at some point in a career in the medical field. And so this is a good picture to study and look at. But I'm probably really only going to be using things like cephalic, thoracic, abdominal, pelvic, and then some of these lower extremities. So then a posterior view, of course, you've got some other stuff. And so that's another thing to keep in mind is, in my cephalic region, I'm going to have all of these, right? Your frontal, orbital, buccal, nasal, oral, and mental, but that's on the anterior. On the posterior view, I'm going to have a cranial, occipital, and auricular regions. And so they change depending on where you are in relation to the body. Body cavities and membranes are going to have lots of different cavities housed within other cavities. And generally, though, we're gonna name those depending on what's around it. So we usually group the cavities into a posterior aspect and ventral cavity. So your posterior aspect is going to be completely encased in bone. And because it is completely encased in bone, we're looking at a physically and developmentally distinctive area of the body. And we're going to subdivide that into your cranial and vertebral canal, cranial cavity and vertebral canal. So the cranial cavity is right up here. It's the head box. And then the vertebral canal is going to be the little tube that is formed by all of the different vertebral bones that form the housing for your spinal cord. So your ventral cavity, though, way bigger than your posterior cavity, of course, anteriorly placed in the body, and does not, of course, completely encase your organs in your bone. We partition it into thoracic and abdominal pelvic cavities. Your thoracic cavity is going to be sort of up here. It's the thorax, right? Really the dividing line is going to be your diaphragm, which kind of follows. Can't see me very well. It kind of follows the rib cage, right? So that's going to be your thoracic, and and then your abdominal pelvic is going to be the cavity that houses your digestive system, reproductive system, renal system, so on and so forth. So within the body cavities, you're going to have some serous membranes. These serous membranes are secretory tissues that provide a serous fluid that's sort of a lubricating fluid. If any of you have gone hunting, you cut open your animal after you've killed it, after you've harvested it, you dump out the viscera, and all of the organs are going to be sort of slick and slimy. That is going to be the serous fluid. So. And you do have two layers. Let me back up there. You do have two layers, a parietal layer and a visceral layer. I'm going to talk about that in a little more detail in just a minute. But the parietal layer is going to line the internal surface of the body wall. So that's going to be the interior. It's going to line the cavity itself, where the visceral layer is going to be covering the organs themselves, the external surface. So parietal and visceral. So here's the body cavities. You've got your cranial cavity here, vertebral canal right there that make up your posterior aspect. Posterior because it's all sort of behind, dang it, all sort of behind all of this. And then you've got your anterior or ventral cavity right here, which is going to include your thoracic cavity, the dividing line of which is going to be the diaphragm right there. And so essentially the only organs that are housed in your thoracic cavity are going to be the lungs, the heart, and then your trachea and esophagus. Your abdominal cavity, however, is going to be right there, which is going to house the digestive system, and then the pelvic cavity, which is going to house a little bit of digestive system and reproductive organs as well. And together they make up the abdominal pelvic cavity. So when we look at those serous membranes though, they're arranged like a fist in a balloon. So imagine for a minute that this fist right here is your heart, and your wrist and arm is going to be all of the various tubes that come out of your heart, your vascular system. And so what we see here, we take that balloon, we push the fist in, and the balloon is going to cover the fist on the outside, but then there's also going to be this second layer right here. And in between that, we're going to see a pocket. And in your organs, that pocket is going to be filled with fluid, serous fluid, that allows the heart or whatever organ that's in there to sort of move freely inside this cavity. And then you're going to have this outer layer. And so the inside layer of the balloon would be the visceral layer of the serous membrane, because it's covering the organ itself. It's covering the viscera. And then this outer layer is going to be covering, or coating, I should say, the inside of the cavity, the body cavity. But, and this is really important, they are continuous with one another. So right here, the visceral membrane, the visceral serous membrane is then going to turn into the parietal right there. As it kind of turns this corner, it's going to turn into parietal, because it's going to turn and then coat the body cavity. I do a lot of these hand things. I don't even know if you guys can see them, and I don't even know if they're valuable, but it is what it is. So you're going to have a couple of these spaces in your thoracic cavity: mediastinum, pericardium. Mediastinum is going to be the median space in the thoracic cavity. It's going to be the space in between your lungs that carries the heart. And then within the mediastinum, of course, we have a pericardium, parietal and visceral pericardium. The parietal is going to be coating the outside cavity, and then the visceral pericardium is going to be covering the heart's external surface. And then a pericardial cavity, the space in between those two layers. Pleura is going to be the serous membrane associated with your lungs, a parietal, visceral pleura, and then a pleural cavity. So here it is, right? You can look at that very carefully, and you can see that the two membranes, the visceral and the parietal, are continuous with one another. It's like we take that heart, we just shoved it in a balloon. And for your heart, we've got the mediastinum with the pericardium. And then over here, with the lungs, we've got the pleura, right? We've got the pleura, the visceral pleura and pericardium. Visceral and parietal pleura. You're going to get these mixed up. I get them mixed up quite often. And that's why it's going to be important for you to study. Make sure that you're getting this stuff correct. So abdominal cavity is superior to the pelvic cavity, contains your digestive system. Like I said, pelvic is inferior, in between the hip bones, contains a little bit of your digestive system, and then reproductive system as well. We do have the same thing going on in here. We've got a serous membrane. The peritoneum, you got a parietal peritoneum and visceral peritoneum and a peritoneal cavity. So, and here it all is. No, really, we've got this nice little mid-sagittal section of the body right there. I want you to notice all of these little holes and all of these little lines. It's because the intestines are going, see, they're going through that membrane several different times. They're going through that plane several times, and so you see several different holes. Then we've got regions and quadrants. We can partition the abdominal pelvic cavity into these 9 compartments. And we can actually take that and essentially, right. We got them. The three main ones here are going to be your umbilical, epigastric, and hypogastric. But then we've got also the right hypochondriac, left hypochondriac, right lumbar, left lumbar, right iliac, and left iliac. So, and there they are right there. But then we can also, so those are going to be your regions, 9 regions, but then we can divide your abdominal pelvic cavity into quadrants too. Quad meaning 4. You've got right and left upper quadrant, right and left lower quadrant. I don't know if you can see me doing this thing, but you can look at it on the picture certainly. Right and left, upper and lower quadrants. Homeostasis, we've talked about that. Ability of an organism to maintain that consistent internal environment, really important. You have to maintain a consistent internal temperature. You have to maintain consistent levels of calcium, water, oxygen, carbon dioxide, all of these different things. All of these different little balances have to be maintained in your body. And so we've got some components here of your homeostatic system. You've got a receptor, a control center, and a receptor, a control center, and an effector. An effector, right? So the receptor is going to detect the change in the variable. For example, a change in the temperature sensed by your skin. The control center is going to interpret that input and then send out the appropriate response, right? So your nervous system can regulate your blood pressure. Your nervous system can regulate your surface temperature too. Endocrine response can also respond to that. And then the effector is going to be the structure, the anatomic structure that brings about those changes to alter the stimulus. So here it is. Here's the stimulus, gets picked up by the receptor, sends that information to the control center, sends the response to the effector, and that effector then is going to restore the homeostatic balance. Negative versus positive feedback. Negative feedback is going to be fluctuating in between your set point. So, for example, your temperature. Again, most people have a temperature of what? 98, 96 point. Wow, this is bad. Hang on just a minute. This is terrible. I don't even know. The body, the human, it's 98 point something degrees, 98.1, I think. Human body temperature. This is very embarrassing. This is what happens in my face-to-face classes though, so I'm not going to stop. All right, yeah, 98.6 is the human body temperature. So that's the set point, right? But nobody, well, some people do. Some people maintain 98.6, but some people maintain 98.1. Some people maintain, 98.8. Your temperature is going to go up, it's going to go down, it's going to go up, it's going to go down, but it's going to remain sort of in that general ballpark of 98.6, because as it starts to creep up, we're going to get those receptors and control centers sending information to the effector, which will then bring it down. As it starts to creep down, we're going to do the opposite thing, bring it back up, bring it back down, bring it back up, bring it back down. That's negative feedback. Negative feedback is making sure that we keep that teeter-totter balanced. Positive feedback is a little bit different. So negative feedback is really common in the body. Positive feedback is a little bit different. The stimulus is going to be reinforced and increased so that it continues to go like farther and farther and more and more. I'm at an hour here. We're getting close to being done though. Your examples here, of course, are breastfeeding, blood clotting, labor. Let's take a look really quick. So positive feedback of nursing a baby. The stimulus is that the baby is going to be suckling at the breast. The receptor, you're going to have a bunch of these sensory receptors in the skin that detect that suckling action, sends that information up to the control center, the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus then is going to say, hey, release oxytocin. That oxytocin is released, and then the mammary tissue within the breast is going to be stimulated to produce milk. Then you're going to get some musculature that is going to help to eject the milk into, obviously, the baby's mouth. But then as that baby continues to feed, you know, the baby is going to get a taste of the milk and be like, all right, great, let's get some more going on here. We're going to increase that stimulus or continue that stimulus, which is then going to send more information to the receptor, more information to the control center, and more oxytocin to the effector, which is going to produce more and more and more milk for the baby. And this is why it works. The same thing with labor. You know, when the baby is ready to come out, we're gonna start stimulating things a little bit hormonally, and then we're gonna start sending that oxytocin down to the uterus, which is going to cause contractions, which is going to cause more stimulus of more oxytocin, more contractions, harder contractions, more and more and more oxytocin until the baby is delivered. It's just this sort of loop of more and more and more and more until we reach the desired result. So anyway, the summary here, it's pretty dynamic. I mean, it's always working. That's what dynamic means. It's continually working with your body and changing and making sure that things are working. You got three components: the receptor, control center, and effector, regulated mostly through negative feedback. And if the homeostatic system fails, that's when we get an imbalance. And an imbalance is going to be generally when you have diseases occur. So normal ranges for clinical practice. You guys are gonna learn this. You guys are gonna know this. Body temperature is 98.6. That's one that I should be remembering. Blood glucose is about between 80 and 110 milligrams per deciliter. Blood pressure is generally 90 to 120 over 60 to 80 millimeters of mercury. Now these numbers are really just, you guys don't need to know what millimeters mercury means. That's kind of a chemistry and physics question. What you need to understand for your purposes is that blood pressure is, we like to see it around, you know, 100 over 80, 120 over 80, thereabouts. And then again with, you know, the milligrams over deciliters, again, you don't necessarily need to know exactly what that means, although it is a percentage. You really just need to understand that our blood glucose levels need to be within that 80 to 110. And anything outside of that is going to be abnormal. Now, you know, as you move forward, you're going to understand a little bit more about that milligrams and deciliters. The millimeters mercury you're never going to get because, you know, it's sort of an advanced, well, it's not really advanced, it's just physics and chemistry. But essentially it's a measure of pressure. So anyway, and the normal range for 95% of individuals sampled, and then, you know, 5% of those people, of the healthy population, have some sort of outside values. I mean, for example, Lance Armstrong's blood pressure is going to be way different than mine because Lance Armstrong is, you know, he's a professional athlete. And you know, I'm not, like, really not. I mean, one could look at me and assume that I'm healthy. I assume that I'm healthy, but, you know, I probably have a little bit of high blood pressure at this point in my life. So that's not a healthy blood pressure because it would be slightly over this normal range. Anyway, let's move on here. Homeostasis, diabetes, of course, an example of a homeostatic imbalance. You know, occurs when the mechanisms for regulating your blood glucose aren't functioning. And those fluctuations can cause more and more problems in your body. So treating patients involves figuring out what the cause of the homeostatic imbalance is and then fixing it. So, and so yeah, the clinician's use of the scientific method is going to be to follow them, to follow it. We're going to examine the patient, gather data, come up with a hypothetical diagnosis, make some tests, and then confirm, modify, or reject the initial diagnosis or hypothesis until we can figure out what the definitive hypothesis or diagnosis is. So and then, working on that homeostasis, certain drugs are going to affect homeostatic control. So these are things to keep in mind when we prescribe drugs, of course. Let's see here. Yeah, and so medical imaging, we've got more. These are just tools that we're using to run the scientific method to be looking for those homeostatic imbalances. And that's it. Very good. Finally, we're done. I've got us seven minutes in. I don't know. That sounds like about an hour and 7 minutes or so. So congratulations for making it through your first lecture. It's good stuff. Study it up, study your book, and we'll bring this back up on our next little bit. And I'm going to end this for all.